fellow citizens of all nations. The Republic by Plato. I'm going to talk about summary of the first 5 books in part 1. So let's start. Men of my age flock together. We are birds of a feather, as old proverb says. Common people just flock together. By friends and enemies, do we mean those who are so really, or only in seeming? Sometimes people appear to be our enemies, or appear to be our friends, but they are not really our enemies or our friends. And who do we mean specifically by those? Because sometimes, and most of the times in life, we own our enemies, because adversity is what helps us to grow, what helps us to develop. So our enemies makes us stronger, and it's really good of a question. What do you specifically mean by those? Like by friends and enemies, do we mean those who are so really, or only in seeming? Because some enemies appear enemies in seeming because in trust you own those so-called what you refer to as an enemies so much and even more. We can the same argument can be taken in the level of the state, and because enemies make each other stronger. Like enemies, it brings competition and etc. Justice is in the interest of the stronger generally. So and if you were to think about it, only stronger one can ask for justice. The stronger state can ask for justice. The strong person can ask for justice. When we talk about in the level of states, for example, if you are a weak state, most likely you cannot really ask for justice because you cannot back it up. And justice is in the interest of the strongest, or stronger. So we can say that there is no such thing as justice. Justice is generally a very arbitrary thing, and it's put by definitions. And when we talk about when we say that justice is something that that only the stronger one can ask, we don't want to really accept it, but it is so. And injustice is a man's own profit and interests. And the book 1 ends with these words, where he says that, "For I know not what justice is, and therefore I am not likely to know whether it is or is not a virtue, nor can I say whether the just man is happy or unhappy." Well, we can't really say that. But now let's go to book 2, where we are going to have different perspective and we have toward the justice and what we meant by that it is in the interest of the stronger. "I will show that all men who practice justice do so against their will, of necessity, but not as a good." We can say that life of unjust is, after all, far better than life of the just. But there are people always create, for example, myths that, this unjust person had this horrible end, etc. Or one of the reasons there is belief of afterlife is that people see, in a large scale, that unjust people have great life, and they hope that at last, in the day of some sort of judgment comes, they will be punished. So this is a bias, and the same thing that we've said, that I will demonstrate to you that they do practice justice against their will. We can say it in other words. So those who practice justice, those do so involuntarily, and because they have not the power to be unjust. Basically, they don't have power to follow their interests. So let's repeat this thing because it's very interesting. Those who practice justice do so involuntarily, and because they have not the power to be unjust. We can say that this is true for the vast majority of the cases. Like people that follow justice do so involuntarily, and because they have not the power to be unjust. Because if they had the power, they would most of the time people that hate people in power, we can say that they don't really hate them, but they envy them because they don't have same capabilities and powers. Now let's move on. The highest reach of injustice is to deem just when you are not. This is definitely so. Honesty is for the most part less profitable than dishonesty. Unfortunately, this is also true. God plants guilt among men who he desires utterly to destroy a house. God plants guilt among men when he desires actually to destroy a house. Just have this saying in your mind. God is not the author of all things, but of good only. Basically, in ideal state, we want, according to him, he wants that God to be deemed as the author of all good things, not just author of all things. And it's same in today. Like we have these global religions. Usually people say in their minds, even subconsciously, think that if something good happened, it's because the religious people think this way. Like, it speaks thanks to God. If bad happened, it's something, some other thing's fault. Basically, God has no part in it. Or let's say any other disaster that's happened, or etc. Evil thing that has been done. Like God has no part in it. We automatically assume that God is. The religious people generally assume that God is not the author of all things, but of good only. Now let's go to Book 3. Some tales are to be told, and others are not to be told, to our disciples from their youth upwards. It's a very important distinction to make, that there are some tales we don't want to tell them. For example, we don't want youth in our ideal state to be fearful of this. We don't want them to be cowards, or weak, or not dedicated to the state. Lesson of such a kind as will take away the fear of death. Like we should give them lessons. We should give them noble values that will take, for example, the fear of death away from them, which will make them strong, which will make them stronger, not the weaker, not the submissive one. Surely not bad men, whether coward or any other, who scold or mock or revile one another in drink or out of drink, or who in any other manner sin against themselves and their neighbors in word or deed, as the manner of such is, neither should they be trained to imitate the action of or speech of men or women who are mad or bad. For madness, like vice, is to be known, but not to be practiced or imitated. The virtuous and not the vicious man has wisdom, in my opinion. Obviously, this is a specific opinion, but it's not. It's just an interesting thing to observe. But most likely it's not so. Elder must rule the younger. We don't want people in their ideal state to be younger that rule, because they have not faced the challenges of life yet. They are not, and we will go to the philosopher as soon. Like we don't want them younger generally to rule, because he's younger, still inexperienced. Golden parents will sometimes have a silver son, or a silver parent a golden son, or they may be brass and iron admixture. It means is that, for example, iron parents, this can be understood this way, that the iron parents will have, golden son and daughter. So this is just a very interesting thing to observe and have in our mind, that golden parents will sometimes have a silver son, or a silver parents a golden son. So, and iron and some other mixture. So let's remember that, and let's go to book 4 right now. Pretending to be things they are not. This is very interesting, like a very interesting saying. Pretending to be things they are not. How many times we see this, or generally, like they're pretending to be things, or they are not, or people believe that, or pretend to be things they are not. It's a very obvious thing and a very obvious sign. And it's also something to have in our mind. Now, naturally superior. Some people are naturally superior than the other. And in our ideal state, we want people to work in things they are naturally superior and advance in those things that they are already naturally superior. To dedicate their, basically to work in stuff that they are already naturally superior and gifted. We can say this way. And some people are naturally inferior to naturally superior people. Is marriage the possession of women and the procreation of children, which will all follow the general principle that friends have all things in common, as the proverb says. Now, this is very interesting. Like this, let me remind you that we are in book 4 right now, and this is very mind-boggling thing to say. Read. Okay, what do you mean? That like friends have all things in common. So, as the marriage, the position of women, and the procreation of children, which will all follow the general principle that friends have all things in common, as the proverb says. Like, friends have all things in common. Like, what do you mean? Like, they have wives and children common? It was very mind-blowing, and he stopped talking about this thing. But we're going to get back to this subject in book 5. Now let's continue. No innovation made. Music and gymnastics. Like, he wants, in ideal state, people to be guard against music and etc. Because of this thing. When modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state always change with them. This is brilliant observation. This is very brilliant thought to have. When modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state always change with them. It's very, very interesting thought to entertain and think about it deeply. I spent quite some time thinking about just this saying and what it implies. Nietzsche as well talks about that we should be on guard with certain type of music, and I'm talking about, and you can check that summary of that book where I talk about human to all to human in this channel. But now let's keep going. Charming thing, and okay, let's appreciate this thought again once more. When modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state always change with them. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting observation. Very, very interesting. Now let's continue. Charming thing is that they deem him their worst enemy who tells them the truth. If you want people to hate you, like, tell them the truth. Like, tell them the truth what you think. Like, without any prudence and stuff. Like, people will hate you. People hate each other for like silly reasons. So it wouldn't be like surprising that they will hate you for that. To tell them trust. Like, not only general people, but it's true in many levels. States are as bad as the men. Very you cannot argue with it. Like, states are as bad as the men or people that live in those states, and it is very true. Like, states are as bad as the people that live in those states. They're always fencing that by legislation they will make an end of frauds in contracts and other rascalities, which I was mentioning, not knowing that they are in reality cutting off head of a hydra. These legislations and contracts, etc. Like, it won't end those things. Why? Because it's implied in culture. If, just like we said, states are as bad as the men. Like, it has something to do with this thing. Like, what is the culture of the state? Because some legislation and law won't change anything. Now, let's continue. There is no pass. Still, we must push on. Of course, like, such a interesting thing. Sometimes there is no path. Like, they are, and by the way, we don't appreciate the thoughts and how thoughtful the Republic by Plato is, because we see that when theology comes in and takes over the Christianity, when Christian takes over, these thoughts become unworthy and everything is said by this religion. But we can say that these thoughts which we're going through is far more progressive, far more ahead than what theology brought, the degradation and decline of the reason and science generally. And you can check Mother Georgia, where I talk about church and state relations and how the decline of reason happened generally, and how these brilliant thoughts became some BS for theologists and for religious people at some point. Here is no pass. Still, we must push on. Like, how inspiring this thing is. Like, because for example, I think about artificial general intelligence right now. Here is no past. Like, there is but still we must push on to this progress and discoveries. So that just because there is no past, it doesn't mean that we should not push on. So in general, this entire process of this entire book is revolutionary. If you were to look at which time these things are written, like which time, which period of time, and how Greek people were, Greeks generally were, and these specific individuals. It's just like proof. You cannot avoid it. You cannot walk around it. In each of us, there are the same principles and habits which are in the state, and that from the individual they pass into the state. Very interesting. What do you think about these things? Because in each of us there are same principles and habits which are in the state. It's about principles and habits, and that's from the individual they pass into the state. So everyone has some, some shortcomings passed from our states and from our state's principles and habits, and we should observe those shortcomings and make sure to get rid of them. So it's a very interesting thing to have in our mind generally, and very interesting observation. He is drawing to himself the things which he wishes to possess. There's this part in book 4 which reminded me of this entire movement later started of what it's called, law of attraction. What they talk about, but it's far more interestingly observed here in this book. He's drawing to himself the thing which he wishes to possess. But this is not understood in a grander scale, because there are too many things that are out of hand for individual, and too many randomness. But generally, he is drawing to himself the things which he wishes to possess. If he has given the chance by luck and simply randomness. And now let's go to the book 5. Would you say that all men are equal in excellence, or is one man better than another? It's a very interesting question generally, because this question can have many implications. And would you say that all men are equal in excellence, or is one man better than another? Obviously, the later one is true. One man is better than another. The useful is noble, and the heartful is base. Very interesting. Just have this in your mind. That the wives of our guardians are to be common, and their children are to be common, and no parent is to know his own child, nor any child his parent. This is very interesting observation, which we mentioned in book 4 already, that friends, we should have all things in common. We can say that the family is just failed into the institution, and if you were to think about it even more, like how the agriculturistic era and the global religions have affected the way we breed, our breeding process, suppression of sexuality, and how many how deeply it affected us. It would be better for you, if you want to deeper understanding of this, to check my summary of where I talk about sex at dawn, about these things. This entire thought is very interesting. Now he kind of says something very contradictory here later, where he says that brave men, basically how to reward the brave men, and also there are things that people that during wartime, the people, and also there are very progressive things there that men and women should share all the burdens and should go to war together, etc. Very progressive things said here, but I'm not going to focus on this thing, but I'm going to pay this thing attention here. When he says, for example, that brave men should have more wives in terms that they should have more children to bear. Now, when he says the brave man should have that right, why should? We all discussed, golden parents can have a silver children, or iron parents can have a golden children, or vice versa, etc. So, there is no guarantee that the brave man will have better children. Or specifically says that brave. If he said it would be a very interesting thing if he said that if brave men and women should have more children. It would be very interesting, thing to same. But these things are just, we should also stop here then at some point and appreciate how far would these thoughts are for his time. Like you should stop. We both of us should just appreciate this thing. How far as these thoughts are. Now, there's the guilt of war is always confined to a few persons, and the many are their friends. Basically, this can be understood in many ways. And let's see. So, like the guilt of war is always confined to a few persons, and that the many are their friends. It means that if there is a war, like children, property, children, women, men, young men, etc., should not be killed, should not be, slaughtered, suppressed, etc. Because the guilt of war is always confined to a few persons. But talks about different sense between how war between Hellenes and barbarians. Basically, barbarians are those, is a Greek term. Barbarians are anyone else. Like if you're not a Greek, then you're a barbarian, according to. And they were definitely far. Like reading this thing, you cannot really disagree with these enemies compared to these people. Definitely some others were real barbarians because they were such a advanced civilization compared to their times. They were the advanced civilization compared to their times. Okay, now let's return to the philosopher. Ancient philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one, and those commoner natures who pursue either to the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside. Cities will never have rest from their evils, nor human race, as I believe, and then only will this our state have a possibility of life, and behold the light of day. Now, what he means by philosopher, by true philosopher, and this is a definition of a true philosopher. Those who are lovers of the vision of truth are true philosophers. Those who are lovers of the vision of truth are true philosophers. And this is and there is also in the book we mentioned that also what are you saying, Socrates? Like you will be killed for just saying something so mind-blowing and mind-boggling. Like this is the greatest thoughts. What type of people should be in power? What type of people should rule the other men? And it's generally until philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one. And those commoner natures who pursue either to the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside. Cities will never have rest from their evils, no human race, as I believe, and then only will this our state have a possibility of life, and behold the light of a day. It's such this thought generally surpasses his times. What type of people do we want to rule? Like what type of people, what type of spirit our rulers do you think should have? And it's a very great answer. Those who are lovers of the vision of truth. And many won't like this answer. It's a very understandable why people look they're nuts, because most people are not this way, and and it's very interesting at the same time to make comparison, and what you would say today. And I think that you would say that ideal ruler, the ruler should be the general intelligence in the future, where if such a thing is possible, if it's finally created, the general artificial intelligence should be the one that rules, instead of the philosophers. Now it's very interesting, and it cannot help but just think about these things. And I will make definitely some separate videos about and thoughts about this thing, and more arguments for why it should be general artificial intelligence. Now, and lovers of opinion rather than lovers of wisdom. Just have this in your mind, and let's end this conversation this way. So this is the first 5 books, and part 2 will also come soon enough. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me what you think. See you.